Hello and welcome to Art Day My Way. Today we're going to talk about painting on canvas versus painting on paper. For watercolor and tempera paint, I would recommend just painting on paper, and construction paper works just fine for using tempera paint and watercolor paint. That's why we use tempera paint and watercolor paint for all of our Art Day projects, because it works fine and it's the, I think, least expensive kind of paper that works well. Now, for acrylic paint though, acrylic paint, we can paint on a paper. This is on construction paper, so you can see it's curled. See how it's kind of curled a bit? Now, there's watercolor paper. It is thicker, it's got a texture to it. It works better for acrylic paint than construction paper does. This painting here was made on a piece of watercolor paper. And you can see that it did not really curl up, okay? I haven't done anything to try and flatten it out. It just did not really curl up, and it's got layers and layers of paint on it here already. So you can see just how well it can work for using a lot of paint and for acrylic paint. This was all acrylic paint, okay? So for painting with acrylic paint, I would recommend either using a good watercolor paper or a canvas. Now, I think there's no reason to paint on a canvas with tempera paint or watercolor paint, and I also think it doesn't really work very well. So for tempera paint and watercolor paint, I recommend just painting on construction paper. That's why we paint on construction paper for all of our Art Day projects. But for acrylic paint, I think painting on a canvas is great, and it's actually my favorite. So I like painting on paper with watercolor paint and tempera paint, but for acrylic paint for my own paintings, I found that I do like painting on paper, but I really prefer painting on canvas, especially bigger canvases. That's just what I like, and I've made so many paintings over the years, and I just know what I like, and I like canvas and bigger than this. But I just wanted to show you a little canvas, and this is acrylic paint on canvas, and maybe you can see there's a little bit of a texture that you can see of the canvas. Okay, so a canvas it's a fabric. It looks like this, and then it gets stretched. It's called being stretched over like a wooden frame. Okay, and then it gets hooked on there with some staples. Okay, now sometimes canvases are bigger, wider on the sides, and I prefer wider on the sides, except for the really small ones like this. Sometimes I'll get the thinner ones like this. But there are different sizes of canvases. They come really small all the way to really huge, gigantic canvases. Canvas costs more than paper, okay? So you can get more watercolor paper to paint with acrylic paint. You can get more watercolor paper and have more surfaces to paint on than canvases, okay? So if somebody's just learning and trying out different things and seeing what all they like and learning new skills and techniques with painting, paper is a great way to go. And one thing about paper and canvas is, as my very first painting teacher in college said, she said, "Jessica, the wonderful thing and the terrible thing about painting is you can always paint over it." And that's so true. So on paper and on canvas, if you don't like it, you can paint over it. Now, one thing is there's going to be a texture depending on how thick your paint was and what all you've done to it. That might leave a texture on your painted surface. So if you wanted to paint like some flowers and you wanted to paint them really realistically, then if you had all kinds of other stuff on there, other lines and shapes, going all over it, and then you wanted to paint really realistically on top of it and not use a lot of paint, you might not want that look, all that texture underneath kind of showing through on your painting. But for some paintings, it doesn't matter. Like for this abstract painting, there are other textures from underneath that I can see here, and I think that adds and makes this look better, having those other textures kind of showing through there. Same for a canvas. If you have other stuff going on underneath your layers of paint, it's likely that you're going to see those textures. And sometimes that's fine, and sometimes that's not fine. It just depends on what you want. But that will happen on both canvas and paper, where the textures from other layers of paint can show through your next layers of paint. Okay? And if you are painting on a paper or a canvas, and you get to a point where you realize, I just don't like it. I don't like it at all. I can't fix it. I don't want to work on it anymore like this. Then, especially for a canvas, because they're more expensive, and we want to try to not just be throwing things away, we can gesso over it, okay? So gesso is the white stuff. That's this here. See how this, it does not have gesso on it. It's Gesso. This is the back of the canvas. It does not have gesso on it. But this part, this front part of the canvas already has gesso on it. Well, we can get gesso. There's also black gesso. But usually the gesso people use is white. But you can just paint gesso over it. Cover it with gesso. You could also do the same with this. Just gesso over the whole thing and then start again, okay? Now remember, you might still see some texture through your gesso, and that might stay there for your next thing you paint on there. But for the most part, you can just gesso over things and start again if you would like to. Now, if you are already painting on canvases and you want to paint on a canvas today, that's fine. Otherwise, you can paint on paper. If you're using tempera paint or watercolor paint today, you can paint on construction paper. If you're going to paint with acrylic paint, you can paint on construction paper or watercolor paper or canvas. It's up to you. So this is a painting day. You can use the photo for today, or you can draw or paint anything else. And if you use the photo for your inspiration, you can make your artwork be as much or as little like the photo as you would like. Awesome!